Please, welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, Patrick, introduce yourself.
Yes, my name is Patrick Collette. I'm head of Amalgam Technologies in Quebec City, Canada. We specialize in infrastructures for smart cities, in harvesting, ethical harvesting of data in mobility, and also marketplace and data sharing and analysis. So everything from picking up data at the citizen level in an ethical and responsible way, all the way up to selling that data to companies and city management as well.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. And Peter.
Yes, my name is Joe Peter Chun. I'm based in New York and London. So what we just do is designing smart cities with the local municipality governments and everywhere. Currently, we are working on 7 different projects, and the most important 2 projects coming from Vietnam and also the London. So I run 3 different entities. The World Smart Cities Forum is a non-profit organization based in London. Alki Labs, which is the smart city investment firm based in New York, where we also nurturing the more than 1,000 startups and to convince them into the smart city project. So which is run by X23, the tech accelerator based in London and New York as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and my first question, what's going on with smart cities? What is the new opportunities during the pandemic?
Well, obviously, for my part, we see a big slowdown in access to development in some points. Obviously, right now, the focus is on the pandemic and a lot of other things have been set aside a little bit. So it's slowed down. It's still present, at a very slower pace. We are continuing research and development on our end, and but on the city side, we definitely see some slowing down. However, plans are being made to get things on the way, especially in Canada. We are slowly seeing governments and cities slowly moving forward for the next steps.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Peter.
It could be kind of
what are you on site? What's going on in London, in Asia?
Upside and downside in terms of the smart city project around the world now. I know the second wave is coming, definitely hit the European countries now. So I heard that another lockdown is going to be maybe begin sometime next week from London. I know it is a big hurdle for the municipalities' plan and the city's plan for in terms of the urban regeneration or usage development kind of stuff. I think because the investment is not really just precise in whether they actually invest in a specific project. So it seems like it delayed a little bit of the smart city project, but more demands we actually receive from multiple countries at the moment. So. But they request some special purposes in terms of how they can maintain or sustainable, also the inviting more business into the city and prevent the residents getting out of the city during pandemic, post-pandemic. So I think that will be priority number 1 and maybe a top priority among the small cities in the
Mm-hmm. Okay, and let's look at these opportunities from the technology side. What is the next, like beyond the next 10 years for the cities?
With all this happening right now, the problem still remains. I mean, we're in a pandemic, and the problems that we have prior to that are still there. They're not disappearing. They're not going away. We're still suffering the same. I guess the same caveats as we were before. That being said, with the pandemic, what I see is some people are seeing opportunities where we could have done a lot better having the proper data to manage a lot of things. I wouldn't say it would be perfect, but it would be probably easier to manage if we had the relevant technologies in place. So that's kind of neat because it gives us an opportunity as entrepreneurs to actually step in and highlight the asset that we bring to the table. That being said, like I just said, the problems are still remaining, and it's still the focus of our development today. And we can't let a setback of 6 months to a year, basically stop us in our tracks. For us, we are still working thoroughly on development, and to reach this, the efforts need to be made. We need funds, and we need to keep developing in that sense. And the fundamental problem I see in cities today is the lack of data, the lack of coherent, dense data. Everybody's got a lot of solutions, and that's where our movement infrastructure kind of sees its light of day. Is everybody's got a solution, everybody's got AI. We've got a lot of very competent companies and individuals out there with amazing technologies to solve a lot of problems. However, the baseline problem remains the lack of data, of available data. Because there is data out there. I mean, I'm sure Peter will agree. We see platforms like Google or Facebook that have tons and tons of data. However, it's inaccessible for most startups, for most businesses, or even cities don't have access to that kind of data. It's way out of their price range and way out of their reach. And for us, that's our main focus, is getting that data available for startups and businesses to develop on top of. So I see the future as finally having the opportunity to bring that data to light, and having a lot of businesses and communities and cities and anybody that actually needs that data to develop solutions to actually access it and finally move forward at a very rapid pace.
Thank you so much, Peter.
I totally agree with Patrick's ideas. I mean, the fundamental components of smart city to stand, I think the data is the most important thing, and also who's going to actually utilize those data collected from the public sectors and private sector. So the catchphrase of smart city is people-centric city. So, and data-centric city. So I think you just mentioned about what kind of technology would be really spread out in the next 10 years. We do not know precisely, but most of the technology is based on the data. I think most of the data from the public sector is almost dead. There's they have it, they collected it, but it's not really used for goodwillings and something. So I think kind of the platform to let all the innovators and companies and stakeholders can utilize those data or upgrade those data and commercialize the kind of using those data. That will be the number one the concern and for us to initiate. So Hanoi Smart City, for example, we're actually dealing with right now, and London Smart City. I know the data city kind of initiatives already started from Paris, but I don't think that they actually achieved many things at a time now. So the data connected cities initiative is the most important thing.
Yeah, and I would even add to Peter's comment is, with the pandemic, I think people are starting to see too is privacy to some extent, because the pandemic has kind of stretched a little bit our leniency towards some human rights as privacy-wise. And, we do see some backlash to that, and people understand, it's a temporary, effect right now that we're having. However, a lot of people are also realizing we don't want to lose our privacy rights over the long term. And data collection is probably where the privacy, lack thereof, has the biggest impact. If data collection is not done in a proper way, in a responsible way, you're really going against the grain with people-centric system. So it's getting that balance where you can have, a very citizen-centric environment when you actually gather data. At the same time, you have really high quality data on the other hand. And that's where I believe the balance lies, where you can actually thrive as a platform or a data aggregation system, basically.
Mm-hmm. And they have one more question from our audience. What is the city more smart in the world?
Honestly, I don't think there is a smart city right now.
I agree with that.
I think there's cities that are clever, but I've yet to see smart cities. To me, a smart city has is not just relying on systems, but as a whole infrastructure on its own. And we have yet to see that, where you go from harvesting data all the way to marketing it. And because a smart city is not just a bunch of data, it's a whole ecosystem where you have people generating data, you have entities collecting that data, and you have access to that data for businesses or whoever needs it, basically a very democratic approach. And once you get all of these, the circle starts going, and that's where you will find a smart city, is where you have all of these working cogs and they're all going in the right direction, where you can actually generate revenues and value for the citizen as much as the enterprises and the city itself, and so on and so forth, and it keeps going. To me, that's the definition of a smart city. You've got AI is going on top of this, and now technology can actually thrive on it. But if you have one system that's working and it's working out of a few databases here and there, I mean, you have a clever city. Don't get me wrong; it's smart and it's a step in the right way. But I don't think you have a smart city just yet.
Mm-hmm. Peter, what is?
With Patrick, I think that we need to think about the redefinition of smart city, because a lot of cities and organizations, they actually just exaggerate the terms of smart cities, because the definition and kind of demands and needs for the smart city in, for example, some of the cities in India or some African cities, and not exactly same as the kind of the small city in London, New York, or Singapore and Tokyo. So I think all the demands, those kind of challenging points of the small city comes from all the data from the cities and residents and all those things. And I think that I've noticed that also some of the projects I already engaged myself. For example, like Cognicity project in London, in Canary Wharf, is actually the intelligent city based on AI back in 2015 and 17. But you probably understand that every city, just like it evolves like a human being. For example, like small city initiatives back in 1991 in Amsterdam, Netherlands, was basically picking out all the cars and automobiles out of the center city. And now they are talking about energy efficiency. They're talking about the cost efficiencies in housing. So they're building new houses on the water in Amsterdam and some of the cities in Netherlands. So I think the biggest demands and the agenda is always changed based on how the residents or non-residents in the cities can, react or maybe behave. I think that by now, some of the cities around the world, you can easily get access to the news, but it's still going.
Okay.
You cannot really big achievement still going on right now.
I think Peter has a good point there. We see a lot of really good projects everywhere, in different sectors. And to me, the goal of a smart city is to bring all of those sectors to work together. The moment you can actually get, power usage to transport to, the taxes, everything actually intertwined and talking to each other, that is when you have a smart city, in my sense. And that's where, our holy grail as developers lies, when you can achieve, the understanding of all these intricacies together, because all of them have impact. Mobility has an impact on quality of air, of quality of life, and the whole goal of a smart city is to embrace it and to bring a better quality of life to the citizen. That's the point, to have a better experience as people living in a city, and that experience is based on all of it. And like Peter was saying, it's mobility, it's power, it's having a quality of air, it's all these infrastructures, water to water quality, and sewage, for all I care. That should be smart. We don't have smart sewage, but it's a very, very important part of a city. It's all of these things that actually makes a smart city. But right now, we really have a problem actually trying to gather enough data to kind of kick the wheel start, and having at least a few of those parts working, and eventually to gather all of it and put it all together.
Mm-hmm.
And also the ownership of the smart cities can be, vary. I mean, by now, most of the smart city projects around the world, especially in Asia, or maybe some Middle East, they actually the government-led, like kind of top-down initiatives. So it's not really just going to be, turned out to be really successful. I think. So PPP model is very, very important. But I just like to input something more, another piece in there. So full piece, like people-based PPP model. So I think the ownership by the private sector can be really secured in this kind of project. That is number one issue, because governments, they're always changing in terms of politics, and they stop the kind of, all of a sudden they just stop it, they restart it. So it's not really sustainable in that way. So I think that providing the kind of enough room for the private sector to run it, operate it, using the data enough. I think the deregulation in the specific projects or maybe cities can be really promising point for the successful model of the future city.
Yeah, that's another good point, Peter, where, governments are there to govern and not to develop, and not to, grab a spot on the, private sector's highlights in some extent. And if you want constance in development and in execution, that's the key for a private sector, and it's not really the case for governments that change over time. And like you were saying, one day it's one thing, and then the next day it's something else. And if you want to keep going forward in that sense, obviously the private sector is probably the better part of that.
Mm-hmm. Cool, guys. And one more question from our startups: how we know what is like this technology really great for the smart cities? Or like for the New York City, for example, or for the, I don't know, like for the London, or maybe Canada.
What's the question again? I'm sorry.
How we know it is like this technology and this startup, it's really great for the smart cities.
Okay, so that's maybe Patrick, go on first. I can back up.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of.
Yeah, this is a question from our startups actually.
For a startup standpoint, I mean, where you put yourself in this development of smart cities is very key. Where you come in, and if you come in with a citizen-centric approach, always seeing what are you bringing to the table at the bottom line. If you're going to deal with smart cities, basically is you're going to deal with people, the people that live in that city. And there are your bottom line. You want to make profit, obviously, you're a company. However, value will be brought up to the table as well in monetary sense, but as also what you're bringing to the citizens of that city per se. And that's, I think, one of the key in developing a startup in the smart city sense is you have to keep those two bottom lines, opposed to if I'm creating an app for people to use on a another Snapchat or something. Well, your KPIs, your key metrics that you're going to rely on are going to be very business oriented. Well, in a smart city approach, those KPIs are very different. You're going to have a transparent approach, very transparent, and that's especially regarding money wise, but also privacy. And there's a few things that are additional on the table, because you're not dealing with shareholders, you're dealing with people's everyday life. And if you are going to be successful in it, well, you have to bring a better quality of life to people, throughout the city, or a sector of it, basically. And to me, I think that's the key approach if you're a startup in that sense, in the smart city sphere. Having that mindset will kind of bring you along a different path than if you'd be, a straightforward, business, basically.
Mm-hmm. Patrick, but for example, what is the next big thing in IoT for the smart cities? What do you think?
For smart cities, I think what we're going to see happening is, first of all, people are getting more keen on privacy. And I think, and I've seen it in Toronto with Google trying to implement their smart city infrastructure through the Sidewalk Lab project. I'm pretty sure Peter's aware of that one too. That kind of went down and didn't produce much. And most of the issues there were privacy and ownership of data. And what I think we're going to see in the future is projects that are better built in terms of governance for data and privacy. And because at the end of the day, those two things can actually make or break any project in a smart city sense. If you don't have privacy protection, and if you don't have a data ownership that's democratic, that's open to everyone, then you don't really belong in the public sphere as smart city wise. And once you cross that, I think once we go through this and realize also the value of having an open platform for data, and I don't mean open as a free platform for data, I mean accessibility and democratized platform that makes it possible for any business to have access to a multitude stack of data and not just one big database, one unique database that's very siloed. And once we actually open up those books and we can have, pick and choose through data sets, that's where I think we'll see those smart city arise, out of having all sorts of different solutions for different problems, but that are all interconnected.
Okay, thank you. Peter, it's same question.
Yeah, actually, I'm fully aware of the Google Sidewalk Labs and the Sidewalk Cities and in Toronto. I think I have seen some kind of the misbalancing between the city of Toronto and Google. I think probably they should be completely a kind of the distant structure and governance to who actually owns the data or something like that. So because it's kind of Seattle model a long time ago. Seattle was actually trying to host the Boeing company into Seattle, and Seattle is actually popped up with the re-engineering city or manufacturing city or something like that. I think that maybe Toronto was trying to host the Google to create a better job or maybe digital transformation. I think that Toronto is really working hard to making the city much more, the future city flavor or something like that. My model in Vietnam, in Ukraine, and London is a little bit different because we actually secure the platform for startups. So, for example, like the total budget we're expecting for the smart city in Hanoi. The smart city doesn't mean anything about entire city anyway. So we start with, we kick off the initial project in the major district, which is probably almost like a 500,000 people population, but the tourists is more than 3 million yearly basis. So we just regenerate all those area into the next level of city based on the full 5-year projects, kind of the short-term, mid-term projects, where we are actually thinking about $1 billion US. And I think that maybe 70% goes to the infrastructure and also the other things. But 25%, 30% out of the budget will directly go to the startups. And the way of just doing it, because we are not, accepting the existing bidding system, because every country, every city, they have their own specific bidding system. But based on those kind of conventional way of the bidding system, we cannot bring the startups into those projects. So definitely the lawmakers of the city or central governments involved in this master plan together with us. So we created some sort of the smart city tech sandbox, which goes 12 months core programs, where the more than 200 companies complete each other, and they actually validate their solutions and services in front of the government and also the stakeholders of SPC, a special purpose corporation, bring all the monies coming in. So at the end of the core programs, about 30% of the contestants, they actually picked up by the government and also the members of the stakeholders, and they get the job directly. It's not about the top-down inside of the private sector. So it's actually open discussion and open validation. So they can get the project from the government directly, sign the contract together. At the same time, SPC allows them to use the high growth fund from them and based on the valuations. So I think that each one of the cities we're designing, within 5 years, we inviting about 1,000 startups and R&Ds and SMEs, and about 20-25% they will be actually picking up the projects under the each things. In Hanoi, we have 5 different pillars. So the mobility and finance, and water tech, and environmental technology services, and also the governance. So ELS, out of them, we have more than 10 or maybe 15 different subcategories. So each category will be directly about, the projects for them.
Guys, and last question. Where is the best short investment opportunities for the venture capital firms? Maybe after the pandemic.
Can you say that again? Sorry.
There is the best investment opportunities for the venture capital firms.
That's a pretty good question.
Maybe after the pandemic.
Yeah,
I'm totally agree with you, but the investors should support to the startups in this area.
And that's a pretty interesting question, because if you're going to build a platform that's citizen-centric, investors are usually kind of frown upon these investments, because the technology, is going to provide value to the citizen as probably more than to the startup itself at some point. And that's the whole goal. I mean, but tech-wise, it's hard to. I see venture capitalists having a little problem with that idea, where the most value will create will be for the city itself more than the startup to some extent. Now it's twofold, where you're creating technology, obviously, but I think when you as a startup build something that can be applied outside of that, as well as your current project, if you're building technology to answer one very, very finite question, obviously once that question is answered, whatever you've developed doesn't go further. It's a very shallow investment for an investor to do that. However, if you're developing a technology that has value outside of it and that's seeing beyond the question at hand, well, there is a lot more value for an investor to see, obviously, value in your company and invest per se. So I think that, when you're developing your startup, you need to think that, if anybody is going to put money into it, it can't be a very shallow question. It has to be more profound. You have to have a plan to go beyond that. And that's where the value lies. Because, just answering the question at hand, as a startup in the smart city, well, you're going to create value for a city. That's fine. However, as a startup, you're going to have a hard time getting investment because, obviously the investor's bottom line is not, the quality of life of a city per se.
Thank you so much, Patrick. Peter, what do you think?
I think that yes, like Patrick mentioned that it's a tough time for the startups and investors, because even though investors, they have the chunk of the money in their wallet, their strategy before pandemic and during pandemic is not the same. Exactly, totally different now. So they are thinking about move forward something different in the strategy and also the plans with it. So I think that a lot of governments at the moment, even including the UK government, they actually just spreading their money like to stimulate the fund to support the startups and SMEs. But the thing is, the family offices and venture capitalists and the private equity fund, they actually get the money. They don't know exactly how to spend their money. So probably one of the things that they can do is they are going to spend the money. Invest in those monies into some kind of the decent platform. So that's why I have discussing with some of the investment groups, including family offices, to initiate this kind of tech sandbox model, then this kind of integrations of technology as a bulk. So they can they don't run around the city or, they travel to other countries to take a look at the potential list of the startups or the companies they are trying to invest in. So this is actually the commercializing vault, and every technology service, you can see it. And also you can just see that it's actually coming in based on the smart city project. So this is one thing that I in the middle of discussing with them.
And to add to Peter's, investing in smart cities is kind of awkward a bit, where, I think the small investments that have been done in the past for apps and I wouldn't say cheap development, but, achieving a startup out of very little capital and creating value out of that. I think we've gone through that to some extent, and now we're trying to achieve a bigger goal. And those bigger goals, if you're gonna make a system like sewage smart, the money required to do that is going to be a lot larger than doing a small startup, creating an app and just saying, okay, we created this app and now this brings that much value to the city. But from there on, anything you do, in terms of infrastructure to, make a city smarter, either through, transit or whatever, are going to require a lot more investment in money wise. And that's where I think VCs have a big, have a problem, where unless you've already, done quite a large project, at which point you're not a startup anymore. Startups come up with very great ideas, but sometimes these ideas, I don't think they belong to a bigger company, but they would require the brute force of, a larger corporation, which don't have that startup idea or that startup nimbleness. So, let's say I want tomorrow to do exactly that, you make the sewage system smart. Well, I'm going to require a lot of sensors, a lot of manpower to actually implement that. The outcome is going to be awesome, I'm sure, and I have no doubt about it. But as a startup, how am I going to raise that capital to achieve that and eventually see revenue on the other end? Is it doesn't work. However, as a corporate side, I don't see value in that because I'm not a startup. So it's kind of in that balance is not quite there. But I believe we're going to see, I hope we're going to see, either venture capitalism or investments in startup to achieve those higher grounds, basically, to be able to do a lot more than an app or, a small gizmo or something, finite, but larger infrastructures per se, and have the means to actually achieve something bigger. So I think we've gone through all the stuff that you can do with very little money. Now it's time to move on to bigger things.
Yes, exactly. Okay, guys, thank you for this amazing live stream. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, guys. Yes.
Thank
Have
you.
a great weekend.
You too.
You too. Bye.